Mahsa, and now I wanted to explain about chapter 13, the cultural analysis of postmodernism and postmodernity. In the area of cultural theory, few concepts have breathed as much anxiety and controversy as that of postmodernism, postmodernity, postmodernization, and globalization. Postmodernism has several dimensions. Postmodernity refers to a stage of social development which is thought to be beyond that of modernity. The key idea is that there has been a decisive and radical shift to a post-industrial economy organized around culture and cultural consumption. Postmodernization refers to the process of social change which drives the transition from modernity to postmodernity. Globalization is the process by which the world is becoming more and more interconnected. Many discussion of postmodernity influence some discussion of globalization. Postmodernism in architecture. As debate about architecture have long held a central place in discussions on postmodernism among cultural theorists as well as architects and planners. Cheng suggests that the failure of the scheme is emblematic of wider problems and modernism is architecture. James suggests that modern architecture has several key characteristics. From tends to be univalent, there is an emphasis on the monumental and repetitive use of a few materials and shapes. Buildings are constructed according to the metaphor of the industrial machine. Designer had utopian ideas influenced by artistic, political, and philosophical doctrines. They believed the architecture could play a heroic role as part of a wider project of social and moral engineering. Postmodernism in art and literature. Similar developments have taken place in the fields of art and literature, where postmodernists have pitched themselves against what they see as the ills of modernism. The aesthetic codes of modernism, for the most part, favored work that was deeply serious, internally consistent, innovative, abstract, and authored by an individual genius. To a lesser extent, it has also celebrated reason, order, and knowledge, and carried with it some kind of message or commentary that it thought to be important about world. Figures who have been associated with modernism and whose work embodies this trait include composers like Schoenberg, Berg, Stravinsky, and Webern, artists like Picasso, Matisse, Klee, Mondrian, Pollock, writers like Chaucer, Beckett, Poe, and Eliot. Postmodernity in social theory. Jean-François Lyotard. Intellectual debates about postmodernism often find a point of departure in the writings of the French social philosopher Jean-François Lyotard, 1984. According to Lyotard, societies are organized not just around technologies but also around language, games, and discourse. Jean Baudrillard. Like Lyotard, Jean Baudrillard was a major was a major early influence on the development of theory about the postmodern. As long ago as the late Baudrillard 1998 was arguing that we live in an area where society is no longer based on the exchange of material goods with use values. Rather, he suggests it influences commodities as sign and symbol which have entirely arbitrary and conventional significance within what he called the code. The idea of the code draws on Levi-Straussian notion of culture as a collective grammar of signifiers. Daniel Bell, postmodern's ideas about growing power of knowledge and culture in contemporary society were decisively prefigured in the works of Daniel Bell, written in the 1960s and early 1970s. Turner, 1993. Today, he is increasingly being seen as a theorist of postmodernity avant Lalitri, while Bell is clearly modernist in sensibility and theoretical style. His work such as Till Coming of Post-Industrial Society 1973 and The Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism 1976 document that decisive from an industrial. Further critiques and debates. The neo-Marxist critique of postmodernism and postmodernization represent perhaps the most important line of attack. There is also an endlessly proliferating partisan literature which has relentlessly subject this concept to scrutiny. This tends to circle around three main themes: the timing, definition, and scope of the transition to postmodernity. Problems of timing implicit in the concept of postmodernism is the idea that it somehow comes after modernism, yet when we look closely at various domains we see that artistic modernism reached a high watermark at divergent points. In literature, we think of the work of writers like T.S. Eliot, James Joyce, and Virginia Woolf, and work that reached a peak of innovation. In architecture, as we have seen, the focus is on the international style which arose in 1920s and continued strongly until the 1970s. In music, and paradigm of modernity is associated with the Vienna School. Problem of definition are closely related to those of periodization. Even supporters of postmodernism agree that three are multiple understanding. Bauman, 1992, for example, point out that postmodernity means many different things to many different people. He goes on to suggest that for some it means architectural style, for others the blurring of reality and television. Problem of extent. The issue in hand here concerns the scale and scope of social change Critics suggest that arguments that we are living in an entirely new social and cultural order are exaggerate and tend toward hyperbole. Globalization and culture. In order to round off this chapter, we need to finish with a small detour into the literature on globalization. This is because discussion about postmodernity often overlap closely with those about this process. A major reason for this is a social force associated with the postmodernization of culture. Economic globalization is associated with the rise of world finance market and free trade zone, the global exchange of the goods and services, and the rapid growth on transnational corporation. Political globalization is about the way that the nation state is being suppressed by international organizations, e.g., the United Nations, the European Union, and the rise of